I am excited and thankful to be with you this morning to talk about the boldest pro-life law that has passed in the United States since Roe v. Wade in 1973, and that's the Texas Heartbeat Act. So this law passed during last year's regular legislative session. It was authored by Senator Brian Hughes and sponsored by Representative Shelby Slauson. And as a member of the legislative team, we research, draft, and lobby for pro-life policies in the Texas House and Senate. And so the Texas Heartbeat Act was one of our legislative priorities. And so I know y'all know about this law. I know you're familiar with it. So what I want to do today is kind of just give a little bit more context of where we came from to get this law passed in Texas, kind of more into the details of what the law does, and then talk about all the lawsuits, all the legal back and forth that's been going on to see kind of what we can expect next, and that within the greater context in the pro-life movement. The most important thing to remember about the Texas Heartbeat Act is that despite all of the legal back and forth, the law is in effect, and it's been in effect for 142 days. So since it took effect on September 1st, there's only been 2 days it wasn't in effect, and that's because a federal district judge temporarily blocked it. But otherwise, it's been in effect for 142 days, and each day the law's in effect, it's saving between 75 and 100 preborn children from abortion. And so in this 142 days since the law went into effect, what we've really seen in Texas is a glimpse of what a post-Roe v. Wade world is going to look like. And with the Supreme Court currently hearing a case that could ultimately overturn Roe v. Wade, we're closer to that than we've ever been. And so it's helpful to see what that glimpse looks like so we know how to prepare for what's hopefully just around the corner in our country. Now, while we await a decision from the Supreme Court, already we're seeing states across the country copying the Texas Heartbeat Act in their states. Some of those states have already passed heartbeat laws, but their laws didn't take effect. And so they're copying and modeling our legislation to pass in their states. Already we've seen 5 states file legislation modeled on ours, and a lot more are considering doing so. And we've been communicating with them, right, about how supportive we are to be a resource to them and to see, what can we do to help you pass this strong life-saving law. So that leads to kind of like, well, how did we get here? How did the Texas Heartbeat Act actually get passed? So the Texas legislature only meets for 140 days every other year. And this is the process, the labyrinth it takes for an idea to become a bill to become a law. And that's a good thing in general, right? Like, we want it to be hard for bills to become law to govern us. But when it's things that we care about, like life-saving legislation, what this means is we have to be strategic. And so every session, thousands of bills are going to be filed. During the last regular session, 9,999 bills were filed. Of those, there's going to be dozens that are about pro-life policy. And of those thousands of bills filed, only a fraction are going to become law. And so within the pro-life bills that are filed, there's going to be priorities and good policies. And they're not always the same thing, right? And so given the fact that we have only 140 days, that's a limited amount of energy for our elected officials and their staff, time, obviously, focus, political capital. And so we want to make sure that we help direct all of that limited resources in the best way. And so every session, Texas Right to Life prepares a list of the pro-life priorities. And that's just to help our elected officials and their staff focus in on what are the actual life-saving policies that we really need passed every single session. Because no matter if a bill is strong or weak, if it even sniffs of being pro-life, it's going to take so much work to pass. So we want to make sure that effort is towards things that are actually going to save lives. So that kind of leads into okay, well, how do we decide between what is a priority and what is a good policy? And so when we're deciding that, every bill that is a priority has to meet 3 criteria. It has to directly save lives immediately. It has to advance the cultural conversation, and has to lead to final legal and judicial victories. So the first one is pretty straightforward, right? Directly saving lives. And so what we want to make sure that the laws that are passed by our state legislature actually start saving lives right now. We don't want to wait on the Supreme Court to allow us to save lives. We don't want to pass feel-good bills that make us yay, we're pro-life, but don't actually save lives right now. So we want to make sure that the laws passed are actually directly saving lives right now. The second criterion is to advance the cultural conversation. And the idea behind this one is that we want to make sure that the laws passed by our legislature help y'all have those hard conversations with your pro-abortion friends or fellow students or colleagues or neighbors, whomever, or even people who are indifferent, to talk about what is the preborn child, that they're a human being, and what is happening in an abortion, and the violence and injustice of that. And then finally, the last criterion is to lead to final legal and judicial victories. And so what that means is we want the laws passed to actually help us undermine and overturn Roe. We're not afraid of our laws going to the courts, right? Like, we got legalized abortion in our country up until the moment of birth through a court case. And so it's going to be through another court case that we overturn Roe and return that authority to the states. And so we want to be part of that. We don't want to wait for other states to lead the way. Like, we're Texas, we should be leading the way. We don't want to wait on the Supreme Court to just decide that they're ready to overturn Roe. We want to be helpful in pushing that. We're really uniquely situated as a state to help push that. And so that's why this is one of the criterion as well. And so you can see easily how the Texas Heartbeat Act fulfills all three of these criteria, right? It's directly saving lives right now, it's leading to legal and judicial victories, and it's really helpful in the cultural conversation. Partly because it's in the law, or it's in the media all the time, so everyone knows about it, but also because the idea of heartbeat is really compelling, and talking about a preborn child's heartbeat and then talking about what's happening in an abortion, which is ending that heartbeat. So an important question in thinking about this policy is like, well, why choose heartbeat as a metric? Why not choose something else? And so 13 other states have already passed heartbeat laws, and none of them have taken effect and saved any lives. And so that happens because the state legislature will pass the law and the court immediately blocks it. And so in Texas, we wanted to make sure that the law that we passed actually looked at those states and saw, okay, what did they do and what can we alter to make sure that our law actually takes effect? And so that was helpful in kind of formulating this, but that comes back to why heartbeat? Besides 13 other states have passed this, why use this as a metric? So there's a couple reasons. One is that the heartbeat marks a morally significant biological moment where we can tell if someone is alive or not, right? So it's an unmistakable sign of life. And okay, so I'm not a runner. I do not run. But hypothetically, if you were a runner, I hear there's trails you run on. And so let's say you're running on a trail and you come across someone lying on the side of the trail unconscious. Well, what is the first thing you're gonna do? You're gonna check for a pulse. You're gonna check if there's a heartbeat. It's hardwired in us that the heartbeat is a sign of life. It's also really culturally relatable and compelling, right? It's something all of us can understand. It's something you can talk with people who are indifferent about abortion or who are pro-abortion about. And this goes back to advancing the cultural conversation, right? It's something we can understand and talk about, and it's compelling. And it's helpful for those conversations because it highlights what is the preborn child? He or she is a human being with a heartbeat, and the fact that abortion is violently ending that heartbeat. The last thing about the heartbeat metric is that it is incremental, but it's also bold. So before the heartbeat law passed in Texas, the ban on abortion in our state was at 20 weeks post-fertilization. Well, with this law, the Heartbeat Act, heartbeat is usually detectable about 6 weeks gestation. So that's a significant amount of weeks, and that equates to thousands of preborn children that are now protected under our law who weren't protected before this law took effect, which is great and worth celebrating and being proud of and historic. But it's also incremental, right? Because nothing in this law is saying that the heartbeat is the moment when a preborn child becomes a human being, or heartbeat is when they gain moral value or dignity or deserve legal protection. We know all of those things are true from the moment of fertilization when there is a new, unique human being, right? And so we still have work to do to protect babies pre-heartbeat and to protect babies from the moment of fertilization, but this is still saving so many lives. And so really what this highlights is when we're in the state legislature lobbying for bills, we have really two options. We can either save lives or not save lives. Those are the options we have. And so at Texas Right to Life, we're gonna always opt for saving lives and to saving as many lives as we can right now. And even as we're simultaneously working to prohibit all abortion from the moment of fertilization. Okay, so what does this law actually do? It seems straightforward, but it's kind of nuanced, and so I wanna talk about that a little bit. So the law requires that before an abortion can occur, the abortionist must detect if there is a heartbeat in the preborn child, and they need to use a test that's according to standard medical practice. And if there's a heartbeat, the abortion is prohibited. The only exception to this is a medical emergency situation. And so the law prohibits anyone from committing or knowingly aiding or abetting in an abortion after a baby has a heartbeat. And if someone does if someone does commit or aid or abet in an illegal abortion, they can be sued. The heartbeat, like I said, is usually detectable at about 6 weeks gestation, but the law intentionally doesn't use a specific time frame. It's all centered on this idea of a fetal heartbeat. That's the standard, that's the focus. And the test that the abortionist must use to determine a fetal heartbeat is whatever is appropriate for the child's gestational age and the condition of the pregnant woman. So normally when a state law is passed, or a law is passed, the state is responsible for enforcing the law. And that's how the 13 other states that have passed heartbeat bills already, that's the enforcement mechanism that their laws used, and none of those took effect. So the heartbeat law is different because we looked at those other states to see that was their enforcement mechanism. And in our law, what we did is actually say, like, state, you are prohibited from enforcing this law at all. You cannot be involved. Instead, it's the jurisdiction of private individuals to hold the abortion industry accountable if they violate the law. And private individuals will do that by bringing a lawsuit. And so an important thing in this is that a woman who seeks or obtains an abortion cannot be sued under the law. And the purpose behind that, right, is because we want to keep the focus on and the penalty on those who are benefiting off of the preborn child's death, and that's going to be the abortion industry. So under the law, any individual has standing to bring a lawsuit if someone else violates the law. And if they're successful, there's a minimum $10,000 fine to the claimant. Now, the linchpin for really why this whole law was able to take effect in Texas when it hasn't been able to in any other state is because of this idea of private enforcement mechanism. So this idea that individual citizens can bring a lawsuit against someone who has violated the law. But there are also two other really important reasons to use a private enforcement mechanism. The first one is activist federal judges. So frequently, states will pass a pro-life law and immediately it's sued by the abortion industry. That's just what happens. So when that happens, what ends up happening usually after that is that an activist federal judge, instead of doing their job to actually adjudicate conflicts between parties, they want to score ideological points. And so they will end up preventing the laws from taking effect and holding the laws up in court for years, if not indefinitely. And a great example of this is the dismemberment abortion ban. So Texas Right to Life lobbied for the dismemberment abortion ban in 2017. The state legislature passed the law. It was to ban a gruesome abortion procedure. And immediately the abortion industry sued, and it's been caught up in the courts ever since. Finally, last year, it was able to take effect. But that's 4 years of this law that we passed being held up in the courts. So that's one reason private enforcement mechanism is so important. The second reason is for district attorneys. So district attorneys they represent the state in criminal judicial proceedings in particular districts or counties. And last year, several attorneys general from across the country and district attorneys from across the country, including 4 district attorneys here in Texas, signed a public letter saying that if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned, we're not going to enforce pro-life laws. Well, that's no good. These people are in charge of enforcing our laws, and they've already shown their cards and said, like, no, actually, we're not going to enforce those laws. We're not going to fulfill our oath of office and actually do our job. So knowing that, right, we need to figure out a way to make sure that we actually can get our laws enforced. And so that's another reason to use private enforcement. And so really, the other thing intentionally in the Texas Heartbeat Act is that it only includes civil liability. So what that means is no criminal penalties, so no jail time, no administrative penalties, so no like losing your license. It's all civil liability lawsuits. And the reason we use this is because it's the most effective way to enforce pro-life laws. Okay, well, why is that? Well, the abortion industry is profit-driven. And so if anything's going to jeopardize their bottom line, they are not going to engage in that activity. They're going to comply with the law. And that's actually what we've seen is in the Texas Heartbeat Act, between the threat of lawsuits, between the threat of a civil penalty for violating the law, the abortion industry is actually complying and they're not committing abortions on babies with heartbeats. And so one of the things at Texas Right to Life that we've been doing is we've been monitoring public comments, websites, talking to our pro-life activists across the state to make sure that the abortion industry is actually following the law. And what we're seeing is that they are, which is great. So a question that's often asked in this context is, how would this work? How would you know if someone violated the law in order to bring a lawsuit? And so I just wanted to kind of throw up a quick slide explaining what some of that potential informant information could look like. So it could be a woman who regrets her abortion. It could be a sidewalk counselor who hears some information. It could be a pregnancy center worker or counselor who's talking to an abortion-minded woman or a woman who has had an abortion. And so these are just kind of some examples of how that kind of information could be found out in order to bring a lawsuit under the law. So the Texas Heartbeat Act was signed into law on May 19th of last year. It went into effect on September 1st. And unsurprisingly, the media just completely lost their minds when this law took effect. And part of that is because of the fact that we're prohibiting abortions, and this is the first time a heartbeat law has ever taken effect, and they didn't expect it to. And so you can see some of the headlines here. Texas attorneys say GOP abortion bills could open the door to unlimited lawsuits from strangers. The latest Texas abortion ban is bad, really, really bad. My favorite one is the last one. Texas passes bill that would create anti-abortion vigilantes. I don't know what's so vigilante about following the law and bringing a lawsuit and going through the judicial process, but whatever. So they're mad, right? Because we're prohibiting abortion, we're protecting more preborn children, but they're also mad because of how the law is being enforced, that private enforcement mechanism. So since the law took effect on September 1st, at Texas Right to Life, we've been under a lot of attack as well. And that's because this was a priority for us. Like this was a bill important to us to pass. We've been on the front lines defending it. We want to make sure that it is fully enforced, and we're taking fire for it. And so some of the ways that we have been under attack are our website is under constant hacking attempts. We've had 3 bomb threats thus far at our various regional offices, and our staff has had personal threats and harassment. But another way that we are being attacked is legally. So there have been 16 lawsuits filed against the Texas Heartbeat Act trying to stop it, and thankfully none of them have been successful thus far at blocking the law, which is why it's still in effect. So none of these lawsuits are surprising, right? Like I said, a pro-life law is passed, the abortion industry sues, that's the song and dance that happens. So it's not surprising that this would happen. But there's been a lot of confusion, I think, between just the media and the legal back and forth. And so I want to just go through these lawsuits a little bit to help you understand like what's been going on and what we can expect moving forward from the lawsuits and what that means for the law. So one of the most important things with all these lawsuits is that none of them are actually addressing active disputes between parties at this point. Right? We've not heard of any credible violations of the Texas Heartbeat Act. And so these are all preemptive lawsuits trying to block the law from taking effect or block it staying in effect. And so there's a lot of severe procedural shortcomings in all of these lawsuits. So 14 of these were filed at the state level, and they've been filed by various members of the abortion industry. So Planned Parenthood, several abortionists, and some of the abortion support services groups have all filed these lawsuits against Texas Right to Life. And the attempt is just to cancel us and to keep us from defending and enforcing the law. So all these were filed at the state level. And the most important thing to know about these is they're very narrow. Like they do not broadly block the law. They're very narrow. And it's essentially, let's just take Planned Parenthood because they're the biggest fish. Planned Parenthood trying to stop Texas Right to Life from suing Planned Parenthood under the law. That's it. That's how narrow it is. And that's the case with all of the 14 lawsuits. And so what this means is these lawsuits don't prohibit Texas Right to Life from suing other people who violate the law who aren't party to these lawsuits. It doesn't prevent anyone else from suing Planned Parenthood or the other defendants if a violation occurs. So these lawsuits are ongoing. As you can see, they're very narrow. And we've recently appealed them to the Amarillo Court of Appeals. And so kind of no matter what happens with these, again, they're really narrow and won't block the law. But there's 2 federal lawsuits, and these are very broad, and so I want to talk about these. These were broad attempts, like I said, to stop the law, and the first one is Whole Women's Health v. Jackson. So this was a class action lawsuit filed by a slew of abortion industry actors against representatives of various organizations and agencies who may be involved if a lawsuit was brought under the Texas Heartbeat Act. And so this was an emergency attempt by the abortion industry to block the law before it took effect, quickly worked its way to the US Supreme Court, and thankfully that attempt failed. The US Supreme Court allowed our law to take effect, had the lawsuit continue ongoing, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But the second lawsuit that federally was filed was United States v. Texas, and this was the attempt by the Biden administration's Department of Justice to sue Texas and anyone who would bring a lawsuit under the law. This is obviously a very unprecedented and extreme overreach by the federal government trying to insert itself into our state laws that was properly passed and enacted and trying to invalidate something it believes is unconstitutional. This has never been done before where the federal government sues a state over a law they passed. But it's not necessarily surprising either, given President Biden's, sorry, Freudian slip, President Biden's radical abortion agenda and his long record, right, of failing to protect preborn children and failing to protect pregnant mothers. And so both of these lawsuits, right, you can see from just the brief explanation, they're attempts by the abortion industry to sue state actors. Well, we already talked about that under this law, the state's prohibited from enforcing the law. So it just highlights this, this desperation from the abortion industry to stop the law and sue whoever they can think of to try to block it. Well, on November 1st, on November 1st, the Supreme Court heard both of these cases, and it was just on boring but important procedural things, not on the constitutionality of the law, not on the meat or the merit of it, but procedural issues. Well, on December 10th, the Supreme Court released their ruling, and they said that the law could stay in effect, which was great. They completely dismissed the Biden lawsuit, and on the Whole Women's Health one, they narrowed it in and said, okay, this lawsuit can continue, but it's only going to be regarding 4 state agency actors. And so with this, really, the lawsuit's gutted, and the abortion industry knows it. They know they're out of options. They're desperate. They're trying to do what they can to salvage this, but there's not much left. And so this lawsuit was sent to the Texas Supreme Court just earlier this week because of the fact that the only defendants left are these 4 state agency actors. And so whatever decision comes from them, it's probably going to be a while till we hear from them, but it's going to be narrow given the fact that the defendants are so narrow. And Thursday, the Supreme Court again denied the abortion industry's petition to reroute that case from the Texas Supreme Court back to the federal district judge who had blocked the law in the first place for those 2 days. And the Supreme Court said no. And so that's really encouraging too, to see the Supreme Court allow our law to take effect and stay in effect and continue to deny the abortion industry's desperate attempts to block our law. And so with all this, the point really is despite these 16 lawsuits at the federal level and the state level, the Texas Heartbeat Act is still in effect and has survived all of these legal challenges. And so in the midst of all of this legal back and forth with our law, really the case that we as the pro-life movement are looking toward is out of Mississippi. And this is Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. It's a case surrounding a Mississippi law that prohibited abortion at 15 weeks. The abortion industry sued, shocker, and so it's worked its way to the Supreme Court, and on December 1st, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in this case. And so the specific question the court is asking is, the court is considering is, are all early abortion bans unconstitutional or not? What's so exciting about this case is the fact that in Mississippi's brief to the court, they asked the court outright to overturn Roe v. Wade. And so this is the best chance we have to overturn Roe in a generation. We're going to hear the decision in that case in probably June of this year. And we're really optimistic given the oral arguments and how those went down. And then the fact that the Supreme Court has routinely allowed our Texas Heartbeat Act to stay in effect and take effect. So we're optimistic the court might actually weaken or overturn Roe and return to states that authority that belongs to us of protecting preborn children. So just as I wrap up and send y'all to lunch and to the Capitol to Rally for Life, we have a lot of reasons to celebrate today, even as we are commemorating the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. The Texas Heartbeat Act is in effect. Is it enforceable? No lawsuits have been successful at blocking the law. Since it went into effect on September 1st, it's already spared about or over 10,000 preborn children and their mothers from abortion. And abortion clinics are already signaling that if the law is in effect much longer, they're not going to be able to keep their doors open in our state. So, yeah, so this is So this is a historic victory, something that we as a state should be super excited about and super proud of. And even like this in the context of, we're going to hear a case this year, the decision in a case this year that could overturn Roe v. Wade, which is amazing. And so all of us in this room are really fortunate to have survived Roe v. Wade, but Roe v. Wade isn't going to survive us. And so go rally today with joy and hope, and thank you for your attention. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. We have a couple questions for you before you run away.
Okay.
So first of all, first question is, why is it always referred to as the 6-week abortion ban? Is that verbiage actually anywhere in the legislation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not. Like I said, there's no specific date in pregnancy mentioned, and that's on purpose. I think the reason that we see the pro-abortion movement and media use that is because they don't want to say the word heartbeat. Like even when they're describing it, they talk about fetal flickerings, like electric signals flickering. Like they won't acknowledge what's happening. And I think that's why there's this change in language, because they don't want to acknowledge what's actually going on and the fact that it's a heartbeat.
One more question. I think you kind of alluded to this in your speech. Are there other states trying to pass their version of the Texas Heartbeat Act, and what are those states?
Yeah, so there's 5 other states that have filed legislation. Ohio, Florida, it's a good test from my memory, Michigan, Alabama, and Idaho maybe, and then Arkansas. There's like a lot of other states that are considering filing legislation or already have, and we're talking to them, and they're really excited about the opportunity to do this.
All right, one more refresh. Going once, going twice. And that's all the questions we have. Thank you, Rebecca.